By the time you're watching this, the government shutdown is probably over. Last weekend, a critical mass of Democratic senators broke ranks, opening the door to a negotiated deal that would reopen the government after something like 6 weeks-ish of shutting down. And with that knowledge, we must ask the question, what the f*** was any of that for? From Battleborn Progress, this is Battleborn Bites. My name is Jacob. Let's vote on a continuing resolution, I guess. Before we get into the who's, what's, and wherefores, it's probably worth revisiting how this all started. It's been 6 weeks, after all, and I think it's fair to say we're all different people now. If you want to skip to some of the analysis, pontification, etc., we've got chapters marked for your skipping pleasure. If you want a deeper dive into historical shutdowns, you can check out our previous video here, but TLDR, government shutdowns happen because Congress, the only branch of government with the power to spend money, can't agree on an actual budget. In this instance, Republicans repealed a set of key tax subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, which meant that people who bought health insurance on those ACA exchanges were going to see their premiums double or triple once those tax subsidies actually ended this fall during open enrollment. Now, ordinarily, the slim Republican majority in the Senate wouldn't be enough for an actual policy bill to get past the filibuster. That's the 60-vote majority required for most things in the Senate. More on the filibuster later. However, Republicans were able to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, so-called, without Democratic support through a legislative trick called reconciliation. This is mega cliff notes, but reconciliation bypasses the filibuster because it time limits debate in the Senate. But you can only include certain things in a reconciliation bill because of something called the Byrd Rule. That's Byrd with a Y, which prevents a full end around the filibuster. Hence, even after the reconciliation process, Congress still needed to pass the rest of the budget. And that's where we get to the shutdown. House Democrats from the jump had been voting against the Republican-backed spending package. But Senate Democrats are the ones with the tools here, since they can exert power with the filibuster, even in the minority. Thus, Senate Democrats vote against the House spending package, the old spending bill expires, and the shutdown commences. The shutdown dynamic this time was immediately different. Traditionally, lawmakers from both parties will make a big deal out of passing piecemeal funding bills, usually stuff like making sure that the military gets paid on time, etc. But this time, House Speaker Mike Johnson tries something completely different. He sends everyone home, leaving the shutdown negotiations fully in the hands of the Senate.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
This is a negotiating tactic. If Democrats can't force a different deal out of the House Republicans, then the Senate is left with only the deal that those House Republicans have already passed, which was set to expire on November 21st. But it's also just like neutering the House. Truly, there has never been a House Speaker less interested in being House Speaker than Mike Johnson. Separately, the Trump White House tried to mount a pressure campaign to make Democrats fold and accept a deal that would do nothing on the ACA tax credits. See, the White House has generally been trotting out Office of Management and Budget Director and Project 2025 architect Russ Vought as some kind of boogeyman. Like, Trump literally tweeted about Vought being the Grim Reaper, but AI, because IRL Vought looks like this. Like, look at this man. You cannot convince me to be afraid of a guy with prescription lenses. Not possible. As part of the shutdown, Vought promised mass layoffs, north of 10,000, he said, as part of reductions in force, or RIFs. After doing that, Vought was immediately blocked by a federal judge, and in some cases, cabinet departments just kind of ignored him. Politico reported last month that out of 8,000 jobs Vought wanted cut at the Health and Human Services Department, the department actually went ahead with 954 cuts, which is a lot, but not 8,000. There was also briefly the issue of military pay, which was resolved in maybe the most corrupt way possible. That is, of course, when a secret donor gave the government $130 million to pay the troops. Trump didn't name the donor and called him a patriot online, but the New York Times had to find out that actually it was reclusive billionaire and Trump friend Timothy Mellon. It is also just crazy because, as reported by the Times, $130 million for the U.S. military equals about $100 per service member, just a little shy of a full paycheck. It's also almost certainly a violation of federal laws that prevent agencies from accepting money in excess of congressional appropriations. So that's cool. But for a while, the shutdown was a lot of background noise. Then the cuts to SNAP happened. This, I'm sure you've heard, is the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. It's what we call food stamps now, and it supplements the cost of food for 42 million Americans. Shutdowns have not traditionally lasted long enough to threaten SNAP funding. When they have, like in 2018 and 2019, the USDA traditionally goes out of its way to protect SNAP funding by tapping contingency accounts. These are rainy day funds that are designed to make sure that people don't lose the benefits that are keeping them alive. But Trump 2 is different. Now the White House tells the USDA not to use those contingency accounts, essentially weaponizing SNAP recipients' hunger as a negotiating tactic against Democrats. This is obviously disastrous, and both red states and blue states rushed to figure out how to avoid this. In Nevada, lawmakers have already proposed a separate system that would mirror programs in Virginia and Louisiana that would let the state pay the vendor for SNAP and EBT, essentially keeping the funding pipeline in the absence of federal dollars, because this is probably going to happen again. The USDA's move was obviously challenged in the courts, where a federal judge ruled that the USDA had an obligation to use contingency funds for SNAP, and thus about half of SNAP was paid out for November. But the Trump administration continued to fight this in the appellate courts, where it remained until the shutdown deal, such as it exists, appeared over the weekend. Finally, there's the air traffic controller of it all. See, the federal government has had a major role in air traffic control since 1936, and since 1941 has made all air traffic controllers federal employees. However, there is just a consistent shortage of air traffic controllers, something that got worse with COVID. The FAA says it needs 14,000 controllers for full operations, and they've got 11,000. Not quite a full deck, as they say. Now, the shutdown happens and no federal employees are being paid. If you're an air traffic controller who's now pulling overtime with no pay for 6 weeks in a row, what are you supposed to do? For many, the only answer is to call out sick, something that happened in 2018's shutdown and was happening again now. As a result, Transportation Secretary and one-time star of MTV's The Real World Boston, Sean Duffy, said flights would decrease by 4% last weekend, with an increase every day the shutdown dragged on. Anyone traveling last weekend really felt that in their bones. Separately, Trump tweeted about how anyone who called out sick wasn't a true patriot and how he was not happy with you. Yeah, just fire a bunch of air traffic controllers before Thanksgiving. I think that will solve the nation's air woes. But with all their powers combined, the Democratic blockade finally broke. 8 Democratic senators, including both of Nevada's senators, Catherine Cortez Masto and Jackie Rosen, voted to support a funding package that will run through January 30th. In a trade, the White House has promised to rehire anyone fired at the beginning of the shutdown. But did they get any guarantees on those ACA tax credits, I hear you ask? No. They did get a guarantee for a vote in December on those tax credits, but obviously Republicans could just tank that vote. And thus, we return to where we started. Yeah, that's it.
What did we learn, Palmer?
I don't know, sir.
I don't know either.
Look, I am but some guy on the internet, but I do have a decade of experience both as a former political reporter and now whatever this is. So here goes. 3 things can be true. 1, in every shutdown, the party who tried to exert demands out of the shutdown hasn't actually won those demands. 2, there might have been real reason to believe that this shutdown was different. And 3, even if it was, there were real risks to letting it continue. And not to try to mind read a crop of sitting U.S. senators, but how much you believe in number 2 probably dictates how willing you are to put up with number 3. And thus why this shutdown ended now, specifically. It should go without saying that the fight over SNAP benefits in particular have been a major sticking point. The Trump administration openly and explicitly weaponized hunger for the poor, a presumed base for Democrats according to Trump and Speaker Mike Johnson, but not one based in reality, since 39% of all SNAP recipients are literal children who cannot vote. The cruelty, as they say, is the point. For now, though, let's talk about normativity. That's your SAT word for the day. What do we think people ought to do? What is the norm we set for ourselves? Well, here's one. Any deal to reopen the government as a starting point should not weaponize starvation. The moral character of our government should not be one that allows our fellow Americans to go hungry, to be underpaid, overworked, and yet still need the government assistance that often goes right back to the companies busy underpaying them, companies like Walmart and Amazon. It's why the negotiating position for Democrats was impossible at a fundamental moral level. But if the vote on ACA subsidies next month fails, it will be impossible not to look back at this moment and see it for what it is, a lost opportunity to extract real concession from an administration that is not just unpopular, but out of control. The second Trump administration has been nothing if not an exercise in modern propaganda, designed from the top down to create a fiction that it no longer needs the levers of power that make up the federal government. In the mind of the MAGA movement, there is only Trump. But that is simply not true, and this shutdown has proven it. Trump won the popular vote in 2024 by 1.5 percentage points. 77.3 million votes to Kamala Harris's 75 million. I am not breaking news here when I say 1.5% does not give Trump the mandate of heaven. And since then, it's only gotten worse. On average, 54.2% of Americans disapprove of Trump, compared to 41.7% who do. On every major issue of his platform, the president is underwater. Minus 15 on healthcare, minus 16 on jobs and the economy, minus 24 on inflation and the cost of living. The American public is not blind to the crisis of right now, one where layoffs are outpacing job growth, prices are rising, home ownership is a thing of the past, and now the poor will starve and flying by plane is no longer safe. These are the defining features of the Trump presidency. For whatever schadenfreude you get out of watching the president get booed at a football game, Commanders fans are doing God's work here. Rising to the challenge of this moment will require opposition within government too. And for all the president's work to install himself as the one true power in Washington, it's shifted blame to one person and one person alone. That being Trump, obviously. That was the promise of this shutdown. Knowing that, I think more than anything it's unfortunate that we'll never know if a better deal was possible. And you know, if you're just asking me, And look, the forever shutdown was never going to happen. The airports were always going to force legislators' hands, especially this close to Thanksgiving. And we were either going to see the filibuster done away with, or we were going to get what we're getting now. Essentially, the deal that's been on the table the whole time. All of the senators breaking the Democratic blockade are up for re-election years from now, and the goldfish memory of the American voter will not remember this moment when the polls open in 2026 or 2028. If there is any silver lining, though, it is this. Voters will remember how they feel in this moment, because no amount of lying about how affordable things are can paper over the truth. And congressional Republicans have desperately wanted to repeal Obamacare since its inception. But even in this moment, when they are doubling and tripling premiums, they have no plan. They don't even have the concept of a plan.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan.
So for all the bluster, we will be left with the legacy of the second Trump administration, a government that has abandoned every single one of us. Unless, of course, you're the president's friend. But that does it for today's episode. If you like the show, be sure to like or subscribe so you're the first to know when we upload a new episode. Until then, for Battleborn Progress, this has been Battleborn Bites. We'll see you next week.